How do you know when a group is ready to regionalize or create chapters? A couple of things when it comes to this. Number one, high level with the ERG movement model. First, we have infancy. That's where you set up the program, what a lot of companies skipped. And so that's why they're kind of stuck in this broken adolescence phase. But nevertheless, infancy is where you set up the program for success. After that, you have early adolescence, where that is essentially a 6-month growth period where you're kind of stabilizing. You just launched this program. Everything's not going to be perfect. You have things documented, but some things are not going to be the best practice. So it's really ERG leaders stabilizing, getting used to their roles, making sure that you have things kind of down, and also a hyper growth period because you just launched. You're going to get the most amount of members through this concentrated chunk here. Mid-adolescence, all right? So stage 3, mid-adolescence, that is essentially where your engagement is stabilizing. So now you're learning best practices on how to engage the community that you have. You're no longer super focused on growth. You're now focused on, again, for the people that you have, how do we make sure that we engage people? Even for a lot of companies that I know today, even though they're technically in broken adolescence because they skipped infancy and they should go back and fix their program, we'll say a lot of programs, at least in their minds, think that they're in mid-adolescence where they're just trying to maintain engagement or get to a good, steady place of engagement, to actually truly know what our best practices for our company, to have it documented. Now, here's the thing, and this is one of the things that we'll talk about in the session, but typically when people get to this mid-adolescence phase and they start seeing some wins, they start seeing some consistency. Our Slack engagement score is consistently high. We've had a few events that were hits that people loved. We actually hit our goal for our member engagement score this year. Sometimes I see a lot of companies actually prematurely try to get to the next level when it comes to their groups. So now this is when they'll say, well, we hit these things, so now we're ready for the next thing. Here's the problem with that. You have to be able to hit metrics consistently over a period of time. You need sustained success. When you have sustained success, that is when you know that you're ready for the next level. It's not you just getting a couple of quick wins and saying, now we're ready to go to the big leagues, which in this case, big leagues would be chapters. You need to have sustained success with the concentrated groups, with the groups all together versus trying to split them out. Because a lot of things happen when you have chapters. When you have chapters, now the governance structure that you have expands. So you're bringing new people onto the ERG leadership teams, which is more for that project manager, chair, whatever you call the person over that ERG in particular, to manage when they haven't even really gotten used to managing the smaller team. Beyond that, it is also more for the ERG program manager to have on their radar to have specific processes for, specific to that office or whatever the chapter is by. But let's assume that it's by office versus by affinities, because that's typically how I see it. So now you have to have, again, hyper specific processes when you don't even know the general processes that work. So you're trying to scale processes that don't even exist, essentially, much less, again, having given you sustained success. That also means, because I believe every single ERG leader should have a metric that they're accountable to. That also means now that you're adding new metrics to this. Again, when you haven't even been able to sustain success with the existing metrics, or oftentimes a lot of companies don't have any metrics. That's just a whole nother random, tantrum. I don't know if that's the word I'm looking for. Nevertheless, so that's another thing. Really, when you create chapters, you're scaling a group. And that really is what late adolescence is for. You move the ERG program into late adolescence, aka the period where you scale the program. When I say scale the program, that can either mean that you are adding more goals for the program, or that you are adding more structure by having chapters. In the case of ERGs, oftentimes it's the adding chapters equals scaling. And I think that a lot of folks have prematurely scaled their program in 2 chapters. Now, there is a part 2 with that question, because let's just say you are a massive company. Let's say you have 20,000 employees. Well, does it make sense to have chapters then? Yeah, I'll give that to you. You can, although I'm not upset at just having a massive ERG with an excellent communications channel with regular programming and occasionally intentionally doing things in different regions. I'm actually not opposed to that. I think it would make a lot of people's lives a lot easier. But nevertheless, let's say that you have maybe a frontline population that's heavily concentrated in some of your major offices or cities that you're in, or let's just say you have in general major offices that have thousands of employees, enough to essentially sustain um, a whole nother set of chapters. Which again, oftentimes when you have a chapter, you're either copy pasting from that main centralized group into these mini chapters, or you're at least expanding. So you're, let's just say in general, I like to recommend for an ERG, 5 ERG leaders. More recently, I'm moving into 4, but let's just stick with the 5, where that would be a chair or project manager, as I'm calling it more recently, a communications lead, 2 events leads, and an activities lead. Activities lead handling all things asynchronous. That is the general governance structure that I like. If you're curious how I'm doing the 4 more recently, I'm actually having the communications lead absorb the activities lead. Although I do feel like they could be 2 separate roles, I also am not upset at them being under the communications lead, because technically the communications lead could do their entire role in less than an hour. That's how I like it with ERG leadership roles, though. I think that every ERG role should be done in less than an hour. Nevertheless, I say that all to say, so when you have a chapter, you're moving and like copy pasting that model into each chapter, or you're at least probably adding 2 events leads to the local chapter, maybe an events, a communications, and an activities, but you're oftentimes adding more than one person. And that is a lot to be managed when, again, the group doesn't even understand best practices on what drives engagement, on what gets people talking within their channels, what helps people to feel what they want their members to feel. If your ERG leaders don't have that down yet, that's not something that you want to scale. This is a very long answer. I guess I'm still into my into my rambles right now. But ultimately, long story short, how do I know when a group is ready to expand and to add chapters? I would say when they've had sustained success. So when they've hit certain metrics, specifically, if I was to say what those metrics are, if their Slack engagement score overall was able to average at over 25% for the course of the year. There's another one for Teams, but I'm just going to say Slack in general, just because that's the first one that I saw it as, or that I first started using this as. If they're able to hit that at 25% or more on average for the entire course of the year, that means that they have a strong communications channel. Communications channels where community is really facilitated. So it's a good sign that their communications, or that their community is healthy. If in addition to that, their member engagement score, so the percentage of their members that were able to get actively involved over the course of the year, was at or above goal. I like to say year 1, you can have a goal of 50%, but honestly shoot for a baseline. It's okay if folks don't hit that goal year 1. Just what is going to be your baseline? Like, where did you all start? So that's why even when we do our event engagement score later, and you'll learn how to calculate this, at least this year, you'll be able to have a baseline. Technically, you could go back to last year and get the data, but that's a lot of work, because then you would have to get every event for every ERG that happened last year. I'm not going to do that to you. Although you could do it to yourself. I mean, it's honestly something I would recommend doing, but it is work, and I get that we all have things that we're doing. Nevertheless, you'll be able to apply that today. But I say all that to say, if the percentage of your members was at or above 50%, or at or above 75%, which is the ambitious goal that I actually oftentimes have folks to stretch for, that is what I would call sustained success, if you're able to do that more than 1 year. And that's why, honestly, with the mid-adolescence stage, that's why that lasts typically, like I said, like between 2 and 4 years, because you have to be able to hit goals consistently.